Hey, push students, this is Mr. Nalimatsu here, coming with your activity regarding the Roaring 20s. So yeah, let's go ahead and get right into it. A little introduction, and we'll talk about it. So the Roaring 20s are often known as a time of just incredibly strong economic growth. And because of this economic growth, there's a really increase in leisure and increase in wealth. Socially, when you think about the Roaring 20s, you definitely think about women pushing the boundaries. You can see many pictures of what we would call the flapper in 1920. Women were wearing, skirts now. They were kind of brought up the level of the dress. And in addition, there was some, women would engage in smoking and drinking of alcohol, some things that were kind of seen by women as immoral. So when you hear the 1920s, if you've watched the movie Great Gatsby or read the book Great Gatsby, that's kind of the time frame that's happening. Or you often think of the flapper, this kind of party girl of a woman that's kind of mature during this time. So that's kind of like an overview of this time. Just an incredible amount of economic growth, incredible amount of wealth that is happening during this time. The government is having a hands-off approach, so businesses becoming economically strong and growing. And eventually, unfortunately, that's going to lead up to some other issues. But at this time, the times are doing really well. The cost of things are going down. The payment to people because of Theodore Square deal and labor is getting more wages. So wealth is increasing among all classes, but obviously disproportionately to the wealthy already. Um, Despite this wealth, the horrors of World War One really make a lot of people question their humanity. Millions upon millions of people were died for this war to end all wars, as it was stated, and that ultimately led to a stalemate. So there are some critics of this era as well, and that's what the Lost Generation is. Kind of the most famous one is F. Scott Fitzgerald, and he wrote a few books about the migration of people during the Great Depression and kind of just a little bit more of a critical view of American society that they had. So not this kind of like opulent one, but kind of one more of the working class and the lower class. A big reason due to all this growth is a lot of technology that's occurring inside of the United States. Starting with the Gilded Age, really this time is just a fervor of inventions, and that's a part of the American spirit that still continues. There's a lot of people that look at our patent laws that really encourage kind of invention and that kind of what we call entrepreneurial or start your own business type of attitude. If any of you guys watch Shark Tank, I know it's kind of like a well watched series. That's kind of an example of that American spirit, right? People consistently pitching and trying to make better and better ideas. So some of the technology that's being increased is we've got telephone there. It's kind of replacing telegraph. Henry Ford is coming out with his Model T, and automobiles are becoming cheaper, and common people, even the workers. That was kind of the goal of Ford, was to make things as cheap as possible that even his workers could afford one, and that's exactly what we did with the use of the assembly line. The phonograph is going to increase leisure as people begin listening to these things called records and music. And so music becomes something, and there's artists. So you can see this kind of outgrowth of culture, that is happening during the 1920s as well. The outgrowth of culture is also happening in New York. This is known as the Harlem Renaissance during World War One, and even prior to that, really after the Civil War, and even prior to even Civil War, we always know that there is this kind of push north by African Americans towards places where they experience at least less racism and outright prejudice that they do inside the South. And so during the Great Migration, where our waves prior to World War One of African Americans leaving the South and moving further and further north into cities like Chicago and Pittsburgh and New York, um, out comes a rebirth of Black culture and African American culture. And one of the big things that come out of this, not only in Harlem, but also in the South as well, is jazz, right? And jazz is going to be the precursor to rock and roll. Elvis Presley is going to take the ideas and the chords of jazz and the rhythm of jazz and actually kind of tweak it and put it into rock and roll. And that's what we have as kind of a strong musical style here in the United States. So this is that outgrowth of culture, but as all these changes happen, there's always going to be reactions, and people are acting conservatively. want to go back to more traditional times. And at this time, we actually see kind of almost a rebirth and re-rise of a group called the Ku Klux Klan. Um, the KKK had a movie at this time. It's called Birth of a Nation, that kind of really inspired the KKK to increase. Also, at this time there was just a lot of criticism of immigration. There's a lot of German and Irish immigrants that had been coming. So a lot of those nativist views that we've talked about in the past, from the Know Nothing Party up until this group, are happening, and it's due to a reaction of a lot of things that are happening, a lot of immigration that's coming around, and the end of the Civil War, and a movement towards white superiority over the society in which they live in and down in the South. As stated earlier, we are having some also immigration laws to restrict immigration during this time. They go to move to a quota system that really limits it, and as you can see here, Uncle Sam with a gate at 3%, and instill other ones. I know that during Woodrow Wilson's tenure, I believe they have a immigration act that also excludes Japanese, which he was kind of against. I know there's the Chinese Exclusion Act. So we're going to see multiple waves of immigration restrictions to limit immigration into the United States. And the last article that you'll read will be about a thing called prohibition. It is an amendment that is signed into law, which outlaws the sale and production of alcohol. If you remember, we had the temperance movement earlier that tried to limit that, and that kept on going. And under the progressives, the temperance movement moves a lot further into outright prohibition and the ending of drinking. Ultimately, this leads to criminal activities like Al Capone. Most famously, having these criminal gangs that actually produce their alcohol. When this happened, there was actually people who were just buying storehouses of alcohol and putting them inside their homes. And then there are also kind of like these underground clubs and the speakeasy that allowed it. So ultimately, it was kind of failure. And the Great Depression, the need for taxes, and the increased gang activity were all reasons in which the actual amendment is repealed with another amendment. And so this is one of the amendments that doesn't stay in American society. So we passed it only to take another one to repeal it. And that's the prohibition to limit and actually stop all alcohol from being sold and produced. All right, guys. So that's the kind of little review of the Roaring 20s. And we'll see you in the next one. All right. Take care. Bye now.